Plastic is right.
Okay, so we're here. I'm not touching anything. I'm not going to touch anything.
All right, are we live? Okay, we're live. Hi, guys. Thanks for bearing with us through our technical issues. Gracious. I'm Emily. I'm your moderator today. Welcome to A Little Bit Gothic. This is Bookstore Romance Day's 3rd annual celebration, which is so cool. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get into the fun stuff. First of all, if you have a question you would like to ask one of our lovely authors, there is an Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit your questions there. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time at the end to get through them. Also, at the bottom of the screen is a green Buy Books from 3rd Street Books tab if you want to buy one or all of the books that we're going to talk about today. Also, if you pre-order Susanna Kearsley's next book, The Vanished Days from 3rd Street Books, we have signed hardcovers that are available for pre-order. So I think that's all my housekeeping. So now we'll start the introductions. Laura, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I'm Laura Joh Rowland, and I'm the author of Portrait of Peril. I remembered to have the book handy. And it's, I think it's number 5 in my series about Sarah Bain, a Victorian photographer who solves mysteries with her friends, Lord Hugh Staunton, who's a gay aristocrat, her friend Mick O'Reilly, a one-time street urchin, and her beloved Detective Sergeant Thomas Barrett. And in this book, she investigates a murder that seems to have been committed by a ghost. So I will say more about that later.
All right, Leanna, do you want to go next?
Sure. I am Leanna Renee Hieber, and I'm the author of over 13 Gothic Gaslamp Fantasy novels, and I'll explain the technical term of Gaslamp Fantasy a little bit later. But basically, a paranormal world encroaching upon a realistic late 19th century. So all of my stuff is historical paranormal. So I'm talking about my latest series, the Spectral City series, which starts with the Spectral City and just completed its trilogy of novellas with A Summoning of Souls behind me. The premise is a girl gang of psychic detectives and their favorite friendly ghosts that help solve weird crime in 1899 Manhattan with a slow burn romance that has been one of my favorite things I've ever written.
All right. That sounds so fun. Diana, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm Diana Biller. I'm the author of The Brightest Star in Paris, which is going to be coming out in October. It's the second in a series that started with The Widow of Rose House. In Brightest Star, let's see, it's set in Belle Epoque, Paris, with a ballerina heroine who is hiding some secrets from her past, and they come back to literally haunt her. And she needs to solve that problem with the help of a very sexy brain doctor.
Cool.
And that's it.
I love it. All right. And Susanna.
Hi, I'm Susanna Kearsley. And my newest one that's coming out in October in the States is, let's see, The Vanished Days. See if I can get it up there. And this is the book proof. So that's just the one that's going out to like reviewers and stuff. But the one we're doing specially for independent bookstores, because we like to do something a little special for independent bookstores. My mom used to own an independent bookstore, so I'm very attached to independence. It's a hardback with a special signed dust jacket, and on the back of the dust jacket is a map of Edinburgh that shows all the locations in the story. So it's only for indies, and the premise of the story, I'm really bad at. Everybody else did these beautiful little synopses, and I'm so bad at doing that. I ramble, so cut me off. I write dual time stories, and this one is the first time I've done dual time that's all in the past. So the present is actually in the past. But it's a story of an investigation that is led by a retired soldier named Adam Williamson, who is investigating the petition of a young widow who has come forward to collect her husband's wages. Her husband was a sailor who died on a Scottish expedition to a doomed colony. She's come forward to collect his wages, but she can't really prove that she was married to him. So Adam is called into service to help prove or disprove whether she was actually married to him, and his feelings start getting tangled up in the investigation, and he has to go back and delve into her past. And it's a sort of prequel, sort of companion novel to The Winter Sea, because a lot of the same characters are present and part of the present day story takes place at the same time as the Winter Sea past story. So that's as simple as I can make it. So
yeah, you did great.
Yeah. We followed it. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Sounds great. My reading list just got so long. Okay, so we're going to do the really indulgent question first, because this is my favorite question to hear from authors, is, and I'll let you pick. You can either do the first Gothic novel that got you hooked, or the first romance novel that got you hooked, or you can do both. I'm fine with either. I always need more to read. So we'll shake up the order this time, unless somebody like really desperately wants to go first. Otherwise, I'll just keep picking at random. All right, Leanna, let's put you on the hot seat first.
Ooh,
classic.
Such a good one. Such a good one.
So for those who are not looking at the screen, this is a copy of Jane Eyre. My original copy of Jane Eyre got literally actually disintegrated. So I got this beautiful Gothic, so Gothic and romance all in one. And yep. The Brontes, more than Jane Austen, really inspired my voice in a lot of ways, because all of the Brontes are dealing with some kind of form of a Gothic novel one way or another, whether it's Gothic romance with a lowercase r or Gothic romance with an uppercase r. All of the Brontes really helped me. I felt like I found myself in their work, and that was a huge, basically follow a direct line to my Strangely Beautiful saga, which was my debut series. Very Rochester vibes in that series. So,
except Rochester is so much more like healthy than Heathcliff. You know?
That's what I'm saying.
In a way, it's just like
Heathcliff didn't have that mad woman in the attic, though. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But an institution. This is a whole other panel.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Yeah, it's a whole. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I know. Super side note, but is anybody also listening to the on-air podcast that's doing like a critical read of Jane Eyre right now?
No.
Oh, okay. It's listening assignments for anybody who likes Gothic literature and wants to hear like a really nerdy discussion. It's excellent. Okay, Diana, let's have you go next.
Yeah, I think my gateway novel to Gothic was probably Rebecca, by Daphne du Maurier. I read it at like a really impressionable age. Like I can still remember, I must have been like 11, and I can remember getting like the book from the little library in my hometown. Like, it was just, I must have read it like an unhealthy number of times as a teenager. And I think that not romance, that's a terrible romance, but the Gothic really imprinted on me.
Susanna?
Well, let's see if I can do this without light shining off it, but this... Okay, so my mother was actually reading this when she was pregnant with me. This is Mary Stewart's This Rough Magic. Okay, this is... I was born before she finished the book, and we figured that's what happened to me, is I just came out wanting to know the ending. This is why like Mary Stewart was like is my favorite author of all time. Max Gail, the hero of this, is like, for a long time, probably still is the bar by which all other romance heroes are set. Again, it's Gothic and romance all in one, which is a great combination. It's first person female narration, like Jane Eyre, which Rebecca, which is, I think, part of it, like sucking you into the Gothic thing, which I will probably get into later. That whole idea of the first person dragging you in to a Gothic story, which is something that you don't, the first time you encounter that kind of, is a very enticing thing. But I think for women especially, it's a very enticing thing to be drawn in by a strong female voice into a story, especially when she survives at the end. But this Rough Magic is just, my genesis story as a writer. It's got everything. It's got the travel. It's got the romance, the survival, the smart, ordinary woman who finds herself in extraordinary circumstances and doesn't run away from them, but survives through them. I just love that.
And Laura?
I'm a Phyllis Whitney girl. Anybody love Phyllis Whitney?
Yes.
Yeah, I started out reading her children's books. The first one was The Mystery of the Green Cat, set in San Francisco. It has a mystery to do with the earthquake in San Francisco. And I graduated to her other her books for adults, which I think she's really one of the founding mothers of the early modern Gothic. And one of my favorites is The Turquoise Mask, set in New Mexico. And at some point, I decided I have to go everywhere that Phyllis Whitney wrote about, because she is just a master at place, sense of place, atmosphere. Oh, and she's also really, really good at bitchy female villainesses. So that's another favor.
Well, and there's a thing that I have a tremendous fondness for Phyllis A. Whitney, because when my sister dared me to finish my first novel, after years of writing first chapters and never finishing, and she finally dared me to actually finish one. I didn't know how to do it, but I knew I had to do the dare. I couldn't let her win. So I went to my library, and the only book that I saw that would help me was Phyllis A. Whitney's Guide to Fiction Writing, which is my Bible. And I still, this is like now 28 years later we're talking, I still return to that book, Phyllis A. Whitney's Guide to Fiction Writing. You can get it online. It's I want to call it dummy proof, but not just dummy proof, like the most inspirational book that will lead you from not knowing where to start writing a novel to actually having the novel finished and editing it yourself and sending it in and doing all this stuff. It took me from not knowing what to do to finishing my first novel in the space of like a summer. And it was so wonderful. And just all of that, like all the, she talks about her novels, and she talks about how she came into Gothic writing, and she talks about the birth of the Gothic in the States and how it came to be. And it was, an editor whose mother loved Rebecca and wanted more stories like that, and it was just the coolest thing. So yeah, Phyllis A. Whitney is just the bomb. She's amazing. Yeah, she was
awesome.
I'm gonna go find that book after.
Oh, it's you'll love it. You will just like, all the way through it is just like when you're feeling like she's the reason that I know that when I get to the middle of a book and I feel like throwing it out every single time. She warned me about that. She's got a little checklist at the end of the book for how to go through your own editing checklist, and just it's the best book. So between books, I always go back to that book and read it.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready to get into nitty-gritty Gothic discussion?
Yes.
So one of my favorite things about Gothic as a subgenre is I feel like it's a really elastic category. You can lay it over pretty much any other genre and it will work. But in that, of course, there's the core values and core elements that you have to have for a genre to work. So I wanted to pick your brains about what you feel the core elements of a Gothic novel are, and what a book needs to contain in order to fall under that category. So Susanna, you want to go on the hot seat first, or I can pick someone else?
No, you can put me on the hot seat, but I'm very zen when it comes to what I know what a Gothic feels like when I'm reading it. I'm like, that's one, but yeah. I'm very down on not down on. I don't believe in a lot of rules for writers. I'm not one of these, you have to do this way and you have to do this that way. And I'm exactly the opposite. I'm sort of like, if anybody comes at you and says, you need to do this, you should probably walk away from them and say no. A lot of creativity is bending those rules, like in everything except happy endings for romance. I will die on that hill, man. I will die on that hill. You cannot, I don't care how much modern people want to, change that. No, absolutely not. You have to have the couple together on the last page alive. I'm sorry. Otherwise it's not a romance. It can be romantic, sort of, maybe, but not, it's not a romance. But for a Gothic, the things that make something feel Gothic-y to me are usually when you've got, it doesn't have to be a female voice. I would count The Woman in White as a Gothic, right? Narrated by a man, a really stupid man who should have gone with Marion and not the dippy blonde. But it's got that Gothic feel to it. Usually it's a woman. Usually it's first person. Usually the person is out of their element, completely out of their element. Usually they are without other supports. So they're alone in a strange environment. And it doesn't work if you throw in a lot of like modern ways to get out of it. Like, if your cell phone is working and you can just call for help, it doesn't work as well. Although I'm sure somebody could find a way that it does. It doesn't mean that some writer couldn't find a way. But usually alone, female, strong for me. They have to be strong. Even the older ones, even like ones back in the 19th century, the late 18th century, the strong women, strong characters still for their time have to work. And a sense of danger, sometimes a sense of the paranormal works very, very well for me to weave in that sense of the danger, the sense of the unknown. You don't have to have the dangerous guy with the scar, but it helps to have a little element of not knowing whether the hero is actually the hero. Mm-hmm. That little ambiguity there. So that's where the first person comes in. If you've got a first person narrator, the reader doesn't know. The reader's only seeing through the first person. So you only see as far as they see. So you don't know what everybody else is doing. And that gives you that lens. So you might not necessarily trust everybody around you. Not trusting everybody around you is good. And then I always like the where the sense of place becomes as important as everything else in the story. The sense of place and weather and everything becomes as foreboding as everything else. Like Gothics to me work best if they're in some coastal place or dark, dreary place, or, a nice, bright, happy location for a Gothic just doesn't have the same resonance, although someone could do it. I mean, there are no rules in writing. That's the thing about writing. And, who was it that said there are no, there are however many rules about writing, but nobody knows what they are. It's a very true statement. So, but those things to me sort of make something feel Gothic. I know what it feels like when I read it. Mm-hmm. As close as I can say. Right. When
I teach this subject, I try to break it down into three major things. Mm-hmm. The engine of the Gothic is dread. That's kind of what propels the Gothic forward. So the engine of Gothic is dread, setting as character, just like Susanna said, the setting. So setting is everything. And then it has a psychological focus. So those things, if those things are in play, then you've probably got a pretty solid Gothic setting. So, and then from those three sort of core elements with the psychological focus, you can then start to break things down of, is there a paranormal intrusion onto the narrative, or is it entirely ambiguous, like Henry James' Turn of the Screw, where you never know? The psychological focus can then bring up the idea of the unreliable narrator, which is present in a whole lot of Gothic fiction, utilized to a fantastic degree from the Brontes to Edgar Allan Poe to all the way into the modern Gothic as well, Shirley Jackson. So there, I definitely feel like those kinds of things, that dread, and the dread can also have a little bit of titillation too, because especially if you're introducing romantic elements, the dread can be like, oh my God, I'm having feelings for this person. Should I or should I not? Because they might be dangerous.
Yeah. That's a really excellent way to look at it, because then, yeah, the dread is everything.
Yeah, listening to this conversation, I've been thinking about some novels that one doesn't usually classify as Gothics, and one of my favorites is the Magus by John Fowles. Has anybody read that? It was considered, I guess, a huge literary blockbuster, tour de force from the mid-century. I guess we call it the mid-century now. It wasn't that long ago to me. But it's about a young Englishman who goes to a Greek island to be a teacher at a boys' boarding school. Now this is a Gothic, right? Only it's got a man instead of a woman.
Yep.
And he meets this mysterious man who lives in an isolated estate in the hills on this island, and this man basically teaches him about life in ways that include drugs, sex, alcohol, paranormal, World War II, and this book has everything in it, and it's wonderful. So I would say read it and enjoy it, but also it really fits the Gothic mold very well, and that's something that maybe we'll talk about, is that Gothics don't get as much respect generally as the likes of John Fowles, but he used so many tropes from the Gothic genre, and so do a lot of other writers. Another one I can think of is Sarah Waters' The Little Stranger, which is an excellent haunted house book and starring a man. And maybe the thing is if you put a man in it, it automatically boosts the so-called literary quotient. Oh, this is a literary novel. But if you put a woman in there, it would be, oh, this is a Gothic novel.
Women's fiction. Dracula. Dracula is the ultimate Gothic, right? But it's a male narrator, right?
Yeah, I mean, that fits the dread all the way around. I mean, biting necks, that's dread. But
if it's a man, it's going to be classed as either a literary novel or a crime novel.
Yeah, or sometimes horror. I guess depending on whether horror is hot at the moment or not. It could verge into like Dean Koontz territory or something like that. Right. But I think this goes to show that Gothic is really flexible, and a lot of the elements can be used to great success in other types of fiction too.
Right.
Diana, do you have anything else you want to add in?
I was really struck about Leanna's. I was really struck by Leanna talking about dread. I've always thought of it as anxiety, but I think that those are, very similar. And I guess I was thinking about how setting and character stack on top of each other in Gothics and reflect that. Speaking of male-led novels that have Gothic elements, have you all read Tana French's books?
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking of is Broken Harbor, which is set in like a falling apart, abandoned suburb that was built really recently but cheaply and is falling apart in like economically depressed Ireland, and thinking about how she put like that like the anxiety is in the house that's like a new build but falling apart, and it's supposed to reflect like middle class success, but you know, there are holes in the wall and maybe something is in the wall. So yeah, I'm just really taken with that idea of dread and then the connection to setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're going to go into that shortly. We're going to do two quick things first. Susanna is going to talk a little bit about modern Gothic. And then
very shortly.
Very shortly. And then Leanna is going to give us that definition of Gaslamp Fantasy. And then we're going to dive into talking about character and atmosphere and environment and all that fun stuff. So Susanna, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I need to say very much at all about modern Gothic. I mean, this was just, we were considering giving like definitions of everything. I'm going to let Leanna have more time for Gaslamp because I think it's more of a thing than like modern. I was just gonna say that, you know, like when a lot of people think of Gothics, they think of those covers with the woman running away from the house, you know, and you know, in the filmy thing, and the woman that always goes up the tower that she's not supposed to go up with the candle in the middle of the night, you know, for absolutely no reason other than the writer is making her go up the tower in the middle of the night with the candle, and, you know, and I think Gothic is such a, as Laura was saying, Gothic is a much broader mantle than that, and it deserves a little bit more, well, a lot more respect because it is a broader mantle than that. And I think when you start talking about Gothic, people tend to narrow the lens a lot more and put it in that little box of the woman in the filmy nightdress running across the moors. And really the modern Gothic, you know, beginning even in the 50s with the Mary Stuarts, and then the 60s with Phyllis A. Whitney, they brought it into the modern, they brought it into the everyday, into these regular women and driving their, you know, Bentleys across the French countryside and interwove it with what would today be considered crime novels, but it was still very much a Gothic, very much not quite accepted by the crime writer community, not quite accepted by, you know, it sits on its own. It's got its own genre. And, you know, I've always had trouble being squeezed into a box of genre. Nobody quite knows where to put me because it's like, well, it's got history, mystery, romance, a little bit of paranormal, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. My husband always says they're like old Hitchcock movies. And it's kind of like, well, that's Gothic. That's what that is. A Hitchcock made a living, you know, making movies based on Daphne du Maurier's writing. Right. Rebecca, The Birds, all, you know, so many things based on Daphne du Maurier's books. And Daphne du Maurier wrote Gothic, a lot of them. So it's just that modern Gothic is not what people expect when they think of the old Gothic. And we have to sort of encourage people to not think of it in those old terms without denigrating the older books either. In the same way that, you know, that we don't like, as romance writers, we don't like it when people say, oh yeah, I read a romance novel once, you know, and they're talking about Rosemary Rogers or something like that. You know, we have to also realize that the Gothic novel has moved on from the novels of the 60s that people might be thinking of when we're talking about Gothic. So we have to sort of encourage people to think a little more broadly than it was back then, is really all I wanted to say. It has roots in the novels of the 19th century. It has roots in The Woman in White and Dracula and that sort of thing. It has roots in Phyllis A. Whitney and Mary Stuart, but we've also brought it forward into an era where people are on their cell phones and dealing with different things than they were dealing with now. Sexy brain surgeons and all that, which I highly recommend. So that's all I had to say about that. And now over to the Gaslamp.
Okay, so Gaslamp Fantasy is just a term I tend to explain because it's something that is a relatively new genre term. Tor Books, who's the publisher of my Strangely Beautiful saga, put together an anthology called Queen Victoria's Book of Spells, an anthology of Gaslamp Fantasy. And that was really the first time that that subgenre term had actually been published on an anthology. And so I was honored to be in that anthology with greats like Tana Fili and other incredible group of authors. And in that, we're really exploring what happens when you're writing a 19th century set novel that has interesting otherworldly elements, but is not steampunk. So Gaslamp Fantasy was actually a genre term that was coined to help delineate a sort of separate genre from steampunk. And the idea of steampunk is 19th century set fiction with a technological way of solving problems. So you've got maybe reimagined steam-powered computers. So the idea of steam-powered atmosphere and technology, but reimagined with modern conveyances. So in Gaslamp Fantasy, you're still dealing with a problem, a conflict in your novel, but your characters will solve it with fantasy genre elements rather than science fiction gadgetry. In Gaslamp Fantasy, you're dealing with maybe prophecies, possibly magic. In all of my books, I'm dealing with ghosts. So ghosts are the way to solve most problems in my books, is to talk to the ghosts. So there's a lot of spiritualism involved in my work, which was a 19th century preoccupation. So it's very much in line for me. Gaslamp Fantasy is dealing with the preoccupations of the late 19th century and then trying to weave in fantastical solutions to them rather than necessarily technological ones. Although you can blur those lines. I do have an early EKG device, but my villain uses it to track the psychic energy of my hero and my heroines, plural. So it's used it's a technological idea back when EKGs were first being conceived of, used almost in a magical purpose. So I definitely love blurring those lines. When the early electricity, it seemed like magic for a lot of folks. A lot of early tech does seem very magical. So I really try to kind of toe that line there. But Gaslamp Fantasy gives you that sense of setting. So that's so important in the Gothic. Again, setting is character in the Gothic. So the idea of Gaslamp Fantasy is that you're in a gaslit era. The lighting is very important when you're trying to draw people into that atmospheric situation. You're trying to roll that out for people as they can escape into this alternate time with fantastical elements.
I love that definition so much.
Thank you. It's why I write what I write. So thank you. I don't know how to do anything else.
Well, and we wouldn't want you to do anything else because, I mean, I think that gets back to Gothic being so versatile. Is that, I mean, I think all four of you write wildly different books that can be found in any section of a bookstore, and just the fact that they all have this unifying Gothic theme in common while being so different is so cool. All right, should we talk about character work? So what I'm most interested in knowing, and I think we're about 50-50 on who can speak for each side of this, but there's obviously going to be a difference between the character work you can do in a standalone novel versus what you can do in a series. And I would love to hear your thoughts on how that differs. And then to stack onto that, what do you feel like is something other authors could take from the romance industry or the romance novel and apply to their own character work? But then also, what could romance take from like Gothic fiction or, other genres as well? And Diana, why don't you start us off?
So my books are connected, but they're connected in the historical romance kind of sense. So they're different couples. So they're kind of standalone, but you'll see characters from previous books come in, and there are some continuing threads, and it's the same world. So I found writing in the same world actually really difficult. I found that very challenging. Stuff I'd said 2 years ago, I still had to agree with, which was a real challenge. So that was hard, and I have so much admiration for people. For you guys in the chat who are doing long-running series. I think that is so incredible, and I'm in awe. I think the second part of the question was what can other genres take from romance, and maybe what could romance take from the Gothic? And for me, what has always drawn me to romance is the intense character work. I don't think that there's another genre where I can just routinely expect such in-depth focus on a character arc, growth. Of course, I also love that, in romance, the emphasis is often on healing. So I would say that amazing character focus is something I think that any author could learn something by reading romance novels. I think, and this really ties back to what we've been talking about, but I think the thing that the Gothic contributes is this marvelous understanding of setting as character. So as much as romance explores character, so does Gothic in a different way in the setting. And, when I think about the incredible settings in literature, so many of them are Gothic novels. Obviously my first was Manderley, the ultimate setting. So those are my thoughts.
All right. Laura, do you want to go next?
Yes. My books are classic mysteries. They're a series, and in a modern mystery series, the characters progress through time and their lives. I think some of the older ones, it was like they never got any older. They were always just the same person, and nothing happened in earlier novels that affected the later ones. But it's mostly different. I don't know anybody who's writing that kind of mystery anymore. But so my first series was about a Japanese samurai detective, and it went for 18 books. And he started out in his 30s, and by the end, he was in his 50s and about to become a grandfather. And I said, how the hell did this happen? But my present series is it's only 5 going on 6 books. It's progressing a little bit slower now. I do not think I will live long enough to see that heroine become a grandmother. So that's something. But one thing that historical mysteries take from the Gothic is that idea of the setting, the environment, what I call the house. Manderley was the house. Thornfield Manor was the house. Phyllis Whitney always had a house. So for me, Victorian London is the house, and it has everything. It has the upper crust and the underbelly. It has Jack the Ripper. It has fog, and it's just this wonderful stew. And people have actually made video games about Jack the Ripper and other Victorian stuff. And it's just all these different places where all these secret little things are happening. And that's what I think of as the setting for my entire series. So every series, I'm exploring another room in the house. So in my current book, it's spiritualism. The person who's murdered is a ghost photographer. He takes pictures of ghosts. Well, is he faking it or not? Read the book and you'll see. Something that I think that mystery series definitely borrow from romance is the romance itself. And when you're writing a series, it's really important to have these ongoing story arcs that continue from book to book, build throughout the series, and hopefully you'll live long enough to bring that arc to a climax, as well as solving each individual crime that fills up each book. So my characters always have an ongoing romance. Sometimes there's more than one romance. My current series actually has 3 going on 4 of them. So it's the main character who marries her Mr. Right in Portrait of Peril, and the body's discovered during their wedding. So, okay, worst wedding thing to happen ever. Dead body in the basement of the church, of the haunted church. You know, this is the ruined house that's haunted. So I think that's really something that a lot of mystery writers borrow from romance writers, is the importance of the romance, but we may have to string it out through 18 books instead of finishing up in one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always admire that tightrope that mystery writers with a romance have to balance of like, well, how many books is too soon for them to be together, and how many books is too many? And, you know, there's no perfect number. It's just finding that balance within each story.
And it's interesting with historicals, because I find that you have to get them together faster than in a modern one, just because of the social mores of the time. I mean, they couldn't just live together and sleep together indefinitely. You know, that would have been a no-no during Victorian times, and it would have ended up with probably a lot of doors being shut in their faces. And the last thing you need for a detective is doors shut in their faces when they really need to get inside those doors and solve the mystery.
That's why I have ghosts, because they go through the doors. Mm-hmm. They're very helpful.
Leanna, do you want to go next?
Sure. So just real quickly, the interesting thing for me is that the mystery readers of my Spectral City series were frustrated that my 3-part mystery was not all solved in the first book. So that's been the tricky thing for me. We're all cross-genre writers here. All of us have different genre elements we're bringing in. So the folks who look at Spectral City and see, you know, oh, okay, it's a mystery novel. Yes, it is a mystery novel, but one of the 3-part mystery will be solved here. The next part of the 3-part mystery will be solved in the second book, and the finale will bring it all together. That's a very fantasy novel structure. So that was a bit in conflict with some of the mystery readers that wanted it all, you know, put together in that moment. Romance readers are very forgiving, and as long as you at least have hints of romance and it seems to be going well, folks don't mind the slow burn. And the chemistry of Detective Horowitz and Eve Whitby is really delicious. So folks have really enjoyed that. But he definitely was realizing, oh, I need to make sure that I have as much closure as possible as I'm going, because there is that reader expectation. That's been kind of an interesting thing to navigate. In terms of what the genres can bring and take to one another, the thing I would love for romance to take from the Gothic is the Gothic is so good with secrets, the concept of secrets. And a lot of times in romance novels, you know that the lovers are not communicating well. And sometimes you just want to shake them and be like, would you just talk to one another? But there's lots of situations in the Gothic that are the same, but there are ways and there are impediments for those characters to be able to be honest with one another. And so there's really wonderful twists and turns in the psychology of the Gothic that the romance setting can really take from, because it's more understandable about why people are not being forthcoming. And especially in terms, for me, like Laura was talking about with a historical, we also have to put in the constraints of the time period too. And that's actually helpful in the conflict. So that's definitely something that has been like fun to play with, is that sort of delicious restraint that has to be making that, you know, something like holding a hand, touching a hand is really hot. So I try to always think about that Age of Innocence scene in the film of that beautiful Edith Wharton novel where Daniel Day-Lewis like unbuttons the glove and like kisses the inside of the wrist on Michelle Pfeiffer's hand. And that's like the sexiest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I really try to take a page from those small things that we can kind of be emotionally writ large in the tiniest gesture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Susanna?
Oh, geez. Okay, so I'm usually dealing, like I said, with dual time. I do a lot of, I use a lot of real people in my historical stuff, but they're not famous real people. They're ordinary real people that I draw their letters and journals and stuff out of the archives. So I'm just trying to put ordinary people back on the page as much as possible. So I feel a real responsibility to them. So in terms of character work, I'm sometimes using their own words pulled out of their letters and just kind of restructuring that to make it seem like actual speech that someone might say, as opposed to something that someone might write in a letter. But in the Vanished Days, I've got anybody that read The Winter Sea and knows John Murray from The Winter Sea. John's older brother, Robert, who his family called Robin, is a major character in The Vanished Days, and he was conveniently in prison at the time I needed him to be in prison in real life for the Vanished Days. So he wrote a whole little document about his time in prison, and I'm able to use a lot of the stuff out of that, but I had to recast it. And but so I'm trying to be very careful with these real people's lives, because I feel like I'm kind of, holding them in my hands and putting them on the page. But I've also got these characters moving around them that I've created, and I don't plot that part of the book. I do this very extensive timeline for the historical part of it, but I'm a pantser in all other ways. So character work is kind of fun for me because I have no idea what the characters are going to do, other than, like I said, the happy ending part. So it's kind of like there's a Canadian writer named Thomas Riddell, Rattle, I think is how he pronounced his name, who is a Nova Scotia writer. He wrote back in the mid to late part of the 20th century. And he used to say that it's kind of like, your family's going to be together at Christmas. You're going to see them towards the end of the year, but you have no idea what you're going to get up to between now and then. And that's kind of how it is for me with a novel. I know that my characters are going to be together at the end of the book, because I will always promise my readers that. But I have no idea what they're going to do on the way there. I know they're probably going to go through some terrible times on the way there, but I don't know anything other than at the end of the book they're going to be together. And that makes it really fun for me. So every day I come down with my cup of coffee and I turn on the computer and I have no idea what they're going to do. And that makes my writing room and my day really exciting and fun, but also very frustrating because I'd never know what they're going to do. So in terms of character work, once they're created as a character, they're just kind of loose in this big fictional world that grows ever larger and larger and larger the more books I write. The real characters, the real life characters, and the imagined characters just sort of all mingle around together, and they will just wander into another book at will. I'll start sitting down and writing something, and somebody will just wander through the pages of the book, and I'm like, crap. So now there was a character who wandered into the Vanished Days, sat down because I needed a clerk for Adam, my main character, and he sat down and started working. And I didn't honestly figure out, I knew his name. I could see him in my head because I see everything like a film, but I did not know who he was or where he fit into the larger scheme of my books until about 2/3 of the way through the book. And I was like, oh, how did I not catch that from your surname? How did I not get, and people are going to get to the end of the book and think, how could you not know? And I was like, I did not know. So anyway, that's how weird I am with characters. They're like real people to me. And everybody in my family thinks I should be committed because I have this writing room filled of imaginary people. But that's just the way it is. If anybody's ever seen the Christmas film, The Man Who Invented Christmas, that's pretty much what my daily writing life is like. They just sort of all wander around. As for what I think romance could learn from the Gothic is maybe, I've read some good romances that were written in the first person, not so much so anymore. Liz Fielding did one, actually. I think Liz Fielding did one a long time ago. Nicola Cornick did a really good one. They don't let people do them anymore. Even the single viewpoint has gone the way of the dodo. Everybody has to have the dual viewpoint now, what the man is thinking, what the woman is thinking. The single viewpoint I kind of miss because it's kind of nice to just know what one person is thinking. Sometimes that little bit of, I don't know what is on his mind anymore. I kind of miss that. As for what other genres could learn from romance, happy endings are really nice. You know, happy endings are not unrealistic. My parents met when they were 15. They got married when they were 21. They are now in their early 80s and they still hold hands. You know, they are the epitome of the happy ending. And you will never convince me that a happy ending is an unrealistic thing. So it's just, I have never understood the literary fiction's fascination with the unhappy ending, and it's just, if other genres could just get over this idea that in order to be serious fiction, you have to be unhappy. I had a very nice life. I have, had ups and downs in my life, but my childhood was pretty angst free. And, I love the romance genre because I know that I am going to, at the end of that book, feel like everybody got what they deserved. And I'm going to be able to put that book aside with a sense of satisfaction. And that's why I write in the romance genre, because I want to be able to give my readers that same sense of satisfaction. And, it's not a bad thing to give readers, and it's not unrealistic. No. To say that it is an unrealistic feature of life is just wrong. We all know people in our lives who, have happy things in our lives. So,
and I think we need it all the more right now in this current climate. I think that, putting some positivity, hope, and love in the world is never, ever a bad idea. It's why, I have horror elements, I have spooky elements in my work, but I don't stay in that place. I'm not interested in staying there. I want to move through that, as I want that journey towards something better, something hopeful, something beautiful.
Well, and it's like Laura's mysteries, mystery is all about giving resolution, giving, giving justice, bringing that's a good thing too. That there's a reason why when life gets hard, readers turn to mystery and romance, and they always did. Throughout history, that's where readers go. Look back to the Depression, look back to, that's where readers want to go. You don't turn to Under the Volcano, which is, I keep harping on poor old, Malcolm, but, it's just such a terrible ending to a book. It really is. That's why I, don't read the last page of The Vanished Days first, but I tend to read the last page of most books first because of the book Under the Volcano, which has the worst ending. It's like someone threw a dead dog after him as he fell screaming into the abyss. I'm sorry if I spoiled the book for you, but now you don't have to read it. It's a terrible thing. It's just so, it's just, why would you end a story like that? It's just, when you could have people together loving each other like most people do in life. It was Richard Curtis, the man who wrote Notting Hill and Four Weddings and a Funeral, said this amazing, beautiful thing when he was asked, why do you write these fluffy movies instead of serious ones? And he said something like, if I were to write a story about, I'm paraphrasing him, if I were to write a story about a soldier who goes AWOL and shoots a pregnant woman in the head and, whatever else, he said it would be called searingly realistic, when such a thing has probably never happened, in the history of mankind. He said, but if I write about two people falling in love and getting married, which only happens a couple of million times a day, all over the world, he said it's somehow termed unrealistic. Why is that?
Well, I think that it relates to that it's maybe biological and genetic in origin. There's you may have heard of something called the negativity bias, that we naturally pay more attention to negative, dangerous, awful, scary things because it's a survival mechanism. If you ignore something dangerous and scary, you might die. But if you ignore all the happy things, you might not be happy, but you won't die. So, and I think that it's not only us, I don't know if you'd call us more popular, commercial, or modern writers that get this, but also Shakespeare. What were considered his greatest plays? Macbeth is not a comedy.
No, Hamlet.
Hamlet is not is not fluffy. So his
Romeo and Juliet.
his
not a romance.
Not a romance.
Non-fluffies get much more critical acclaim than, say, A Midsummer Night's Dream or The Taming of the Shrew or something like that. So, hey, we're not the only ones that got this. I wonder if he ever talked about that. Yeah, can't you just see him in a pub somewhere complaining that, Midsummer Night's Dream got no respect. I got to crank out another Julius Caesar or something.
Yeah.
As much as I hate to do this, we are up at our time. Which I'm so sad. I had so many more things I wanted to talk about, but this was a fantastic discussion, and I loved it so much. Real quick, for readers that want to keep up with your publishing and find out what you're up to, where can everyone find you on the internet? Diana, why don't you start, and we'll just go.
I am at DC Biller on Twitter and Instagram, and dianabiller.com.
Leanna?
LeannaReneeHieber.com. I am most active on Twitter at Leanna Renee, so my first and my middle name. And then on Instagram, it is my full name. I came late to Instagram, but I really like it. So my full name is my handle at Instagram. Thanks. And again, on my website, you'll find all the different things that I do, and also a writer's resource guide for those of you who are aspiring writers.
Laura?
So LauraJohRowland.com and Laura Joh Rowland on Facebook. Be my friend. I'd love to have you.
Oh, nice.
And Susanna?
And I'm probably most active on Twitter. I spend more time on Twitter than I ought to. I'm just Susanna Kearsley on Twitter, capital S, capital K. That makes a difference. It probably doesn't. All jammed together. And I'm Susanna Kearsley author altogether on Facebook. And I'm on Instagram. I'm Susanna.Kearsley on Instagram, but I'm almost never there. I'm very bad on Instagram. So your best bet is to find me on, and my website is just SusannaKearsley.com. And down at the bottom of my website are all the little icons to find me on my socials. So that if you forget everything, just go to SusannaKearsley.com and go down at the bottom and click the icons.
Awesome. All right. And again, there's the buy link for to Third Street Books at the bottom. You can also check out, that'll take you directly to the website. We're also on Instagram as Third Street Books. And I'm assuming everyone here is already following Bookstore Romance Day on Instagram.
Oh, and thank you so much to Billy and you guys for organizing this.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
And please support independent bookstores. They've had a really, really hard time this past, we think we've had a hard time this past time with the pandemic. Independent bookstores they really need your support. They need their communities to back up, with them. And so please, they're supporting all us romance writers through this time. So we need you to support them back, please.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the Saturday. And if you're watching and you're going on to another panel, I hope you have a great rest of Bookstore Romance Day. Thanks, everyone.